Welcome to the CASME podcast, where we bring you insights and conversation from the world of indirect procurement.
Hello, it's Graham Crawshaw here from CASME, and once again here for another podcast, and delighted to have a very special guest today, and therefore welcome Nicolas to the podcast. And I'll let him introduce himself first, then we'll tell you what we're going to talk about today. Nicolas, welcome.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, Graham. Thank you for having me as an invite. I actually am French, you could tell by the accent, but I've been working all of my life for foreign companies internationally. I've been living in Singapore, London, Paris, Zurich, and I'm now in Stockholm, and I worked across different industries. From information services, technology, baby food, airline, and now I worked for a telecom company leading the sourcing and supply chain COE. My background is, let's say, 95% sourcing and procurement, and I did as well a little bit on designing, building, and leading shared services as well. That sort of complements my experience.
Wow, that is varied, Nicolas, and just all those different locations where you've been living as well. That's very adventurous.
Yeah, and it's part of the fun. I guess it's part of the good things of being part of sourcing or procurement. You've got the opportunity to work in very different locations and experience very different life.
Yeah, no, that's true. I lived in Los Angeles for 4 years. That's definitely another story. But you're right. And I think also getting that international perspective on everything is very important. Whether you are British, French, American, you need to understand how the rest of the world sort of behaves and thinks. I think that's tremendous experience that every person should try and get at some point in their career.
Yeah, no, I agree. We talked quite often about diversity, and I think it's not only about industry or backgrounds, or it's as well where you live, what you've experienced as well is important. And that's quite often help as well to be able to bring to your daily job something different from others.
Right, excellent. You know what? That could have been a podcast in its own right. That's a really interesting one. But we're not here to talk about that. We're not here to talk about diversity. We're talking today about the evolution of category management. And I know this is a topic very close to your heart. Nicolas, what's your view on category management from all your experience and travels? How important is it for procurement?
I think for me, it's critical. It's critical actually to have a strategic approach to your spend category. Otherwise, you just become an RFP processes. You can't just take a project, manage it, and put it to the end. Otherwise, it's like a transaction. So for me, if you really want to add additional value, you need to have that strategic approach. And then we tend to call that category management, because that's for me embed all of the elements that needs to be defined internally, externally, and then that's encompass all of the analysis to be able to look at a category in a structured way to just get beyond what would just be otherwise a price negotiation.
That's a very good point, actually. So you're saying that it's that structure that really defines what category management's all about?
It is, and to an extent, I think, contrary to what I just said, I've seen in the past category management or category strategy being a very yearly rigid process, quite often siloed, very cost focused. And what I'm experiencing now, it's much more agile, responsive, and a process that adapts dynamically to the world we live in. So yes, it's a structured approach, it's a process, but at the same time, it should as well consider what we experience every day, like that Vulcan world that a lot of people are mentioning. So that's sort of volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So you can address that as well, part of a structured category management approach.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So how have you seen it evolve over time? Because I guess, you hinted it being overly structured. I think there probably was a time that it was like everyone was saying, this is the way you should do it, and it's got to be done this way. And I think we moved away from that. But would you see that it's evolved and over sort of how long a period to get to the point we're at today?
Yeah, I think it did. I think it did because the cycle are much faster than it was before as well. I think we sort of tend to have moved from a more transactional, reactive, cost-focused category management approach to an approach that would be much more agile, but as well go broader than just focusing on cost and addressing additional areas like risk management, like innovation. So it's much more value-focused than cost management focused than it was before. So you've got definitely that evolution, which is as well going to the way we develop product today, the way companies are dynamically evolving. If you think about product life cycle, how it was 20 years ago and how it is now, I think most companies will tend to develop product much more quickly, get them on the market and retire them. And I think that's exactly what happened with category management as well. We've adapted to the same cycle. Instead of having it yearly and very focused on cost, we have it agile, quarterly almost revisions, and then adapted to the dynamic of the world.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, no, I think that all makes sense. And actually, you've got to keep up with the changes. And if you were doing your category management as you were 10 years ago, then you're badly out of date and not be able to be reactive to the volatile market that we're all operating in at the moment. So in terms of category management, should it be the same for every category? What's your experience? How flexible do you need within the style itself?
Well, I think it needs to be fully flexible. I think for me, you can have anything from globally defined to globally executed to country defined, country executed. I think it really depends on what you are talking about. It depends as well on the structure of your company. Is it BU driven? Is it consolidated? How are you structured? Where are your stakeholders are? So you need to consider all of those elements. So if I just take examples, when you look at actually supply market and an area that could be relatively global, both in execution and definition, you'd think about, generally speaking, information technology as example, like development, IT development, etc. That would be actually relatively standardized. You've got global suppliers. And if you look at, I don't know, production tooling, like things like MRO, it might be actually still a globally defined care strategy, but then you will execute it either regionally or locally. So, and then in between, you've got anything that you could think of. But no, you wouldn't actually try to go to a very rigid approach to say everything needs to be designed and executed globally. That wouldn't probably give you the best result.
Right. So who is the category management documentation for? So when you are documenting, you're defining what you're going to be doing, who would you see? Do the stakeholders really care about this?
Well, it depends. I think it depends how you set it up. I think if you actually go to what we were all doing 20 years ago, where the stakeholders wouldn't really care, and I think that's what you need to modify first, is how do you bring them on board and ensure that they get value out of what you are putting together. And that's really start by that, is definitely understanding the stakeholders' need, the company needs, and then you need to adapt how you're going to build it and how you're going to document that to that environment. So it's really adapting the process. For me, to just create value, it needs to be a shared document, stakeholders and sourcing, and plus anybody you identify that would actually have a stake into the process. Sometimes it might be finance, it might be R&D, it might be a number of people across the company, but it should be a shared document if you really want to get value out of that.
Right. So not something that just procurement goes away and tries to put together itself.
Well, yeah, and we've seen too many of that where we spend 2-3 weeks just building something up. It goes onto a SharePoint and you forget about it until the following year, where someone is asking whether you deliver anything that was on that document. So for me, it should be live and it should be shared.
Right. Okay. So talking about sort of stakeholders, and I think it's very much linked to this. What are you seeing as the perception that stakeholders have of procurement and the way that we're working now?
And I think that's something that procurement worked on a lot in the past years, is making sure that we communicate the value we create. So it's positioning the procurement value to stakeholders. we are not here to just place order. We are not an administrative function. We are here to support resiliency, to deliver innovation. We can help with revenue growth. Sustainability is an element that we work on. So, well, and obviously cost is still one element that we need to focus on. But the perception of procurement evolved as procurement realized that if you want to be more than an admin function, you need to be able to articulate the value proposition back to stakeholders. And it's much, much better done today than it was in the past, I believe.
Yes.
And then there's a perception as well that changed because of the world situation. I think in a day where inflation is up, where you've got some scarcity in certain markets, I think the procurement role is as well more important than it was probably couple of years back. So there's an opportunity given by the market to position yourself, and there's an understanding by procurement leaders that you need to explain that value creation.
Okay. So the fact that you've got that structure, even though it's flexible and agile, actually helps the stakeholder relationship because you're getting them involved, you're getting that understanding really early on, and actually putting this documentation or this approach together to really help them achieve what their objectives are. So it's very much supporting and for stakeholders rather than that administrative task that procurement needs to do in order to, as you say, get the tick in the box that you've got your strategy done and hidden for the rest of the year.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's much broader than category management. It's as well, what do you expect from your procurement team? Who do you recruit? How do you train them? How do you make sure that actually they understand that they need to be open to those conversations? They need to build their knowledge about the company vision and strategy. They need to understand market insights. So you have a lot of work as well that are to be done into the sort of people side of the procurement function as a prerequisite.
Yes, that is that's good to get that summarized. So if we look at the structure of category management teams, how are you seeing this evolve? Are things changing there?
Yeah, I think things are changing. I think the technology is helping as well things to change. And interestingly enough, I think actually working from home and COVID and all of that, actually helped that change to be driven. I see a lot more functions or procurement functions that are actually moving towards getting category managers in being a much smaller group and focusing really in developing those strategy and engaging with stakeholders, with actually having agile sourcing managers working alongside them. So they would actually be a bigger pool of resources that would actually help deliver all of the initiative that goes under the strategy, and a smaller group just building up that strategy. So a lot more collaboration and a lot more focus to delivery on one hand by team that can act across multiple categories, and then much broader and deeper expertise by some category expert, because they can then focus solely onto building that up. And that's an evolution that we've seen around the last 5 years.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, and certainly I've seen that across the CASME membership. In terms of where category managers need to be located, I'll get your views on this first, but I think I'm also seeing a change there.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. We had a lot of debate on that. For me, I'm a fervent partner of location agnostic. I like people actually to be the right one instead of being in the right locations. Now, I think there is a limit to that. I think if actually you are co-located with your stakeholders, the sort of chit-chat by the coffee machine help as well. The conversations helps to build up the strategy. So you need to find a balance in between having people co-located with stakeholders and the flexibility of recruiting the right people, even though they are not in the right locations.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing more organizations almost, once they found the right talent, the right person to manage the category, it doesn't matter where they are, if they've got the skill set to be able to build those stakeholder relationships, then they really can work anywhere. And therefore it's sort of almost better to have, if you've got a global team, to have people in different cities, different regions, rather than trying to bring everybody all together just in one location. I think it helps. We talked about diversity, talked about the sort of the whole range of values that procurement needs to deliver. So actually having people around the world all being able to contribute, but working to quite a systematic and logical structure can definitely seems to be what I'm seeing as a bit of a trend there.
No, I agree. And as you said, I lived in very different cities in the past, and I've always led geographically diverse and dispersed team. And one of the reasons for maintaining that is exactly what you described. I think there is a lot of value into having those different point of view. Now you need to work a lot harder into alignment, then into setting up the vision, the strategy, making sure that even though you are not in the same locations, you all actually align behind what is the purpose of the procurement organization. So, but if you do that right, you actually have much better value by having a geographically diverse team.
Right. And in fact, to give another example, you mentioned earlier about having that sort of insight, the market intelligence, the knowledge from suppliers. Well, if you've got that and you've got then the ability to work with your stakeholders and you're adding value because you're telling them what's going on in the marketplace and what's happening to commodities or what's happening to prices, then again, that makes it much easier because the stakeholders actually want your contribution rather than you working in isolation.
Yes, you are going to get pulled in instead of being the one demanding the engagements. And it goes back definitely to understanding what problem you are trying to solve for them, what's important for them, what's in their list. And then as soon as you've got that right, then you are going to get pulled in. So then when you sit, doesn't matter anymore.
Okay, excellent. So Nicolas, what's your view on how long a category manager should remain managing a category? How long? Number of months? What do you think? Or years? How would you, is it, what's your thoughts on that?
In between years and forever. and let me explain that a little bit.
Okay.
I think it's, and I think there is not one size fits all, but I've got real examples where we actually rotated people because that was the right thing to do, and they had broader knowledge and they can actually bring a different perspective to certain categories. Now I've got areas, and I've got a real example with a BPO specialist where actually he was focusing only on that. He was extremely good in that space, and he did actually most of the larger deal that we worked on as a procurement organization in my previous company. And I think we actually had a number of conversations with him about moving him into different category, and we realized that his knowledge and expertise was actually critical to achieving the objective that we set. So we decided not to move him, and he was extremely happy about that. And I have to say we were as well, because he just brought knowledge onto the table in deals that are extremely complex by nature. So that's why I'm saying from years to forever, because I think I like the idea of rotating. I think it brings value both to the individual and the company. At the same time, it's individual dependent. You need to have those conversations very openly as well.
Actually, you've hit the nail on the head by saying you've got to have those conversations. It is about the discussion. My sense are that there are some categories where actually longevity of experience is probably more important than getting that rotation. So you mentioned BPO. Many travel related specialists tend to remain in travel for a very long time. And as you say, you've got that knowledge, that way of working with suppliers that really then does add value to stakeholders. Any other categories where you think actually that long period of time is advantageous?
I think it's a bit of industry dependent as well. I think definitely agree on BPO and travel, and I can think about advisory and consulting, which is not obvious when you think about it. But then when you are in a world where the largest consulting providers are your largest customers as well, you actually want people that got that understanding and that got longevity. So I think it's my way of saying you could have some generic answers, but then depends in which industry you work on, which company you work on, you might actually consider things slightly differently. And advisory and consulting was one actually where we didn't move our category managers for a long time, just because they understood really well that those revenue growth partnerships sell to opportunities, in addition of understanding the need from the procurement organization perspective. And that's not something which is easy to build.
No, and it does take time, doesn't it? It's interesting. I mean, we did some benchmarking quite recently and to try and tease out, because we'd had this conversation and sort of, it's not black and white. It's not very clear cut. The data we found was that it was 2.5 years was an optimal time before moving someone on. So bring someone fresh to the category, have a different perspective, stop them getting stale, but also bringing new ideas. So I guess with all the procurement, if it was that straightforward, it would all be automated. It's not. So I guess depending, as you say, on the industry, the company, the category, it may vary as to whether you keep someone engaged and they become a true specialist, or whether they become more generalist and used to being thrown into a category that maybe they've got very little knowledge about, but then they have to learn quickly and apply the techniques that are defined within the company to enable them to really add value and contribute very quickly.
Yeah, and I think it's actually a nice segue about skill sets and when you actually bring in new people as well. I think one of the things we tend to do, we always want to hire for seniority and expertise, but you need as well to have a pipeline of talent. So you'll have those junior resources mapped as well to grow your talent bench. So you've got actually not only one person knowing it all, and whether you move that person or not is almost not a question anymore if behind you actually have people he's working with that are more junior, that is trained, that are developing to be your next category manager. So I think it goes as well into that direction too for me. It's not only rotation, it's as well bringing people in at a junior level and growing them.
Right. Yeah. Which again is what is really all procurement functions should be doing to make sure they have that talent and be able to then add value. So it's almost a bit of a closed loop on that one. Before we leave this discussion and move on to technology, I just want to ask, you often hear that people say, well, category management should be retired off. It should be dead. We should be just focusing on agile and projects and keep it focused so that the limited pool of talent that we've got can really focus where the business needs it. Is that a dilemma? What's your views on that, Nicolas?
No, for me, it's not a dilemma, and I would strongly disagree with retiring it. I would fully agree with enhancing, evolving, and adapting it to our changing world. But I wouldn't drop it. I think if you go fully into a project management mode, then you lose the vision, the strategy, and the alignment to the company strategy. Because if you end up managing 10 projects independently, if those 10 projects address a category, how do you ensure that actually it serves the same purpose, it serves a vision, and it's aligned to what needed to be delivered for a stakeholder or group of stakeholders? So for me, category remains a fundamental element of the puzzle. Now, it might need, as I said, to be enhanced and evolved.
Yeah. No, I must admit, I do. I think it's just a controversial statement that people like to make. And as we've been discussing, you can have category management, but it still should be an agile. It should be able to be updated, refreshed, and it's not something that was in a textbook from 15, 20 years ago.
Okay, and for me, we went from years ago into a yearly process to quarterly, or to as soon as an event happens that needs actually to refresh your strategy. There is definitely things that happen into the supply market, into your stakeholders, into company that might just modify how you are going to approach a category. So you shouldn't be structured in a way to say, well, you need to update it quarterly. Actually, it should say you need to update it as soon as you see fit, as soon as there is a new element that will influence how you approach your category and how you drive your different initiatives.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Let's move on to the second topic area that we wanted to discuss, and that is around technologies. So we've just spoken about the need for having some sort of structure, but having some sort of document that doesn't live on a shelf. It is a live document. And I guess if you're going to create that, you really need some help. You need some technology to support you. And why wouldn't you? It shouldn't be just some old presentation that is produced. What's your views on the technologies that support category management?
For me, it's definitely part of the thing that you should be looking at. I think technology help on a number of elements. It's actually provides structure. It's actually provide a guidance through the process as well. And then the most important thing, it provides as well a collaboration platform. We said in the first part of the conversation that need to be a live and shared document. And that's actually what technology can help with, is making sure it's available, it's actually used, it's actually tracked when you make changes. And potentially there is as well a solution that actually can help you to identify those events where you need to revise your strategy. So for me, technology is enhancing the category management process significantly if you pick it the right way.
Okay, excellent. And what's your experience of using different tools and systems? And before I let you answer that question, we've just done some benchmarking that gave some data that sort of said 50% of those that responded, and I think we had about 100 responses, said they were like just about satisfied with the tools and systems that they've now got today to help them with procurement. It's still very early days for many organizations. I think there's a lot of settling down. There's a lot of technological changes still to be required. What's your take on what the market offers in terms of systems and tools to support category management?
I think it's still an evolving market. For me, we've got a relatively mature market when you talk spend analytics, contract management, P2P even more. But I think the sort of enhanced category management solutions and systems are still in its infancy. There is actually a lot more to come in that space to make sure that we got the right system or the right offering. We've evaluated different solutions, and some are ticking most of the right boxes, but not all of them. Integration is still a bit of a challenge, so there is a lot more to come into that space. It's I would concur into saying it's just about right, but it's probably more average than right as it is now.
Right. Actually, Nicolas, can you share what you're looking for? You talk about you've evaluated systems. How do you know when it looks like the potential for being a good system for your particular needs?
So I think we look at a couple of things. We looked at internal collaboration. How do we get actually stakeholders to collaborate with us into the strategy? So what is the mode for that? How do you build that collaboration? How do you guide category manager through a process so they get the information around, well, what are the available levers? What are the different metrics they should be looking at? How they should actually analyze the situation internally, externally. So that's a guide through for the sourcing people. And then there's elements around how do you bring external information into it? So market insights into there. And then there's how do you then define and implement the initiative that are part of the category strategy? And it can be part of that suite, or it can be in a different tool. But then how do we integrate that tool as well with it? So there's those different elements we look at. And obviously beyond that, you look at the cost, the implementation, the user friendliness, but that would be more like things you'd be looking at anyhow.
For anything, for any system. Yeah, that's the, so integration. So that's still a challenge. I think it is for many systems, but from what you're saying, the multiple connections or aspects of this category management system is going to really depend on effective integration.
It will, and I think that's where the conversation in between best of breeds or one system for all comes into conversations as well. It's like, and I'm actually, well, more talking about being best of breeds because I think that's where you get the most value. But then as soon as you go into that direction, you need to think about integrations and how you make it available for the end users. So mostly your procurement managers. So if you've got spend analytics, contract management, P2P, enhanced category management, risk management, so then you might end up with 5, 6, 7 different tools. But then how do you make sure that it's all integrated together and they don't have to look into different systems, different logons, and copy and paste information from one system to another? And that's a very critical piece as soon as you talk technology.
Yes, it could soon become quite a nightmare, can't it? If
Yes.
it's the thoughts of cutting and pasting, duplicating. That's just not what you want to help you. So, in terms of when should you invest, any thoughts on that? Is it clear cut? Do you need to be reasonably mature in terms of your procurement function, or could you just say, "Look, I'm going to invest," and almost let the system guide our processes?
I think you could do both actually,
You can do
and
both,
that's
yeah.
interesting because I've been in both cases where we had a mature organization already, and we thought about the next steps. How could we get more value? And that's where we investigated and then category management and other things as well. And then that was probably something different we were expecting from the system. It was definitely going up the value chain, where there is as well a part when you actually have relatively low maturity, and then you're going to use it to guide people through what you want them to achieve. Now, both implementation and probably the choice of system might be slightly different in those two instances.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I guess the question around all of that is, how do you build a business case? Because our experience is procurement's not always top of the list to get funding. It's often finance, because they need to have the systems to support finance. And as we know, procurement's got its own very specific needs. Any recommendations to anyone considering investing in a system? How would you justify it?
I would definitely. So I think you can build a solid business case around that. You need definitely to identify the drivers that are going to be meaningful, well, for procurement, but as well for the business. Risk management, cost, early engagements. There is potentially as well efficiency that might be built into implementing those systems. So you need definitely to understand what are the triggering metrics. And it needs as well to be aligned with your company. I am in an environment where we are probably more risk adverse than certain area, and that sustainability is high on our list. So definitely when I will look at building a business case, I will see if what we are going to invest in is going to actually be improving one of those two areas. And then I would make sure that we've got metrics in place that could actually serve the purpose in between where we are now and where we could be getting actually with more proper systems. So building business case is really about that. What's the starting point? What's the end point? And how important is the end point to the company overall objective? And making sure you structure it along what's important.
Right. Certainly my experience is that as soon as you start talking about risk management, and we know procurement's got so much more involved with this recently, that really is a great way to build your business case, because again, the value procurement can support the business with when it comes to managing risk, whether it's reputation, whether it's to do with any of the legislation that's around, from ethics to modern day slavery. That support for the business, knowing that procurement can help there, is something. It's difficult to put a figure, an ROI data point on it, but almost if you don't do it, what's the cost?
Yeah, and quite often that's where we tend to go, because that's the easy way to say, if you don't do it, that's the risk and the cost. Now, I would definitely push people as well, procurement leaders, to think about the upside. Is if you do it, well, yeah, of course, you're going to mitigate a certain number of risks, but at the same time, that's the upside you're going to get from those systems. So don't be shy as well, and be ready to have high aspirations and put up a target there.
Right. And also from your experience, how long would it take to actually sort of identify and then implement a system that's really going to help you with category management?
They are, what I've seen or experienced, it's relatively, well, it's much easier than certain systems. I think 3 to 6 months for me seems like something which is doable. It doesn't require a lot of integration. It's relatively user-friendly, so it doesn't require daily training and deployment. So, and I think that's one of the things that's been brought in the recent years as well by all of the upcoming firms in the market, is that actually lighter way of choosing, implementing, and using without to have heavy deployment processes.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicolas. No, that's really interesting because we deliberately didn't want to mention any supplier names. It's the perspective from procurement of having to do the business case, put together the justification and implement the systems. And hopefully people listening to this can relate to that or gain reassurance that it's not quite as painful as perhaps it sounds. And getting it from you is very valuable, as opposed to some salesperson actually trying to sell the system. That's always the challenge.
No, agree. And I think that's definitely nothing close to a spend analytics on an ERP or a P2P implementation, which can take much longer time. Anything which is category management is much lighter in terms of implementation and easier to do.
Excellent. Good. So we've spent the last half hour talking about the evolution of category management. And I think the summary is it definitely is the way forward. Now, you may do things differently than the way that you used to. You've got to be much more agile, much more focused on the business objectives. But it sounds like category management remains the way forward for procurement to really understand and manage the spend that it's got its responsibilities to. Any final words, Nicolas, for people listening?
Probably two things, a sort of do's and don'ts. And I think you can think about don'ts in terms of system, technology. We've talked about that. Will not replace people and process. So start by people because that's the most critical assets you have. But then, it doesn't preempt technology. Then on the do's, I think it's definitely about engaging a wider audience into category management. If I try to summarize, be open to stakeholders, suppliers, market insights, explore the world and push your teams to explore the world. I think that would be the two things that comes into my mind in the sort of don'ts and do's and what we've talked about for the last 30 minutes.
Excellent. Nicolas, it's been fantastic to have this conversation with you. I've really enjoyed sharing some of the ideas, your own personal sort of views, and some of those from the CASME members. So thank you for your contribution there, and look forward to you joining a future CASME podcast. Until then, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed this CASME podcast. All episodes can be found on Spotify and the Apple Podcast app. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a future one. If you'd like to find out more about CASME's procurement events, research and benchmarking, get in touch with us at casme.com.